Tell us about your background.
Yeah, so my background is pretty much all medical device quality and regulatory. I started my career working in vitro diagnostics with Thermo Fisher Scientific in the anatomical pathology division as a quality engineer. Just kind of really super basic, being told go and audit this, and that was it. And really kind of 1345, that's it. Before EU IVDR, all of that kind of stuff, so like the good old days. So that was my beginning. And then after that, I had a few years at Thermo Fisher Scientific, and then I moved to work for Stryker, working in the orthopedic division of Stryker, predominantly on their mergers and acquisitions team, and remediation team. So basically, I was kind of on the team to go and sort out what Stryker wanted to buy, which often wasn't that clean. So, I would go in and do the assessment first from the kind of QA/RA perspective. So see the QMS, look at the technical documentation, and give a report to the mergers and acquisitions team of Stryker to say I wouldn't buy or I would buy with certain caveats. And then from there, I started my consultancy business, and I've just been darting around industry ever since, working on a variety of devices, pacemakers, implantables, orthopedics, contact lenses, lots of ophthalmic devices, as well as lots of IVDs, as well. So, I've kind of had a nice kind of spread of devices that I've worked on. There's easily over 200 now, must be. So I don't know about anyone else on this call, but I really struggle how to show what I've worked on in a CV, like on 2 pages. I don't know how to do it. So yeah, that's pretty much me. It's been all, and right now I do a lot of kind of contract work for notified bodies and certification bodies, as an auditor, assessing conformance against, relevant whatever kind of regulation or standard that I'm kind of asked to assess. So I've had a good view of being the auditor. Spent most of my life, probably like everyone else here, being audited. But having both of the kind of hats and wearing both of the hats has really, I think, made me a better professional. Because I really know what auditors are looking for now, and the reviewers, tech doc reviewers, because I do it a lot, so that's probably up till the current day.
So tell us a little bit what it's like to work for a large manufacturer, because a lot of people here have not worked for large manufacturers
Mm,
directly. And
yeah.
with
So
them,
yeah, so it's super slow. I think is the first thing. Like everything moves slowly. You can basically say anything will take a year plus 2 years, kind of on top of that. I think the one thing I really noticed was your role as a kind of QARA professional was very, very structured. When you're in a large manufacturer versus if you're in a startup, they basically say, we need a tech file. And you're saying, okay, who do I have for biological evaluation? And they point at you. And then you say, who do I have for clinical? And they point at you. And then they say, who do I have for risk? And they point at you. Versus large manufacturers, I think there was one manufacturer I was working with, just finished with them recently, and they had a regulatory team of like 45 people. It's the biggest regulatory team I've ever seen. And they were going for EU MDR, and it was this massive, massive thing. And I remember I was like, this device is not novel. It's not novel. It was nothing really special about this device. They were just transitioning from, MDD to MDR. But I was looking at this to say, why is there such a big program for, a handful of devices, and why does the staff need to be so big? And whereas I got clearance on a similar type of device, not novel, with 2 people, in like half the time, So I think there's a law, I'm not sure if you know it, called Parkinson's law, which is, I don't know how well coined it is or how true it actually is, but I like the principle, which is basically that work expands to fill the time. So you give yourself a year to do it, probably do it in a year. Give yourself 10 days to do it, and you'll probably do it in 10 days. My experience very recently is manufacturers really suffer as a result of that type of phenomenon. People still call EU MDR the new MDR. It's like not new at all. It's super old. So yeah, that's my experience is like, I think anyone going into QARA, I would say start with a startup. Because if you start with a large manufacturer, you're kind of spoiled in that sense, you know. And I felt it when I went to a startup after it. I was like, oh, I need to do everything here, you know. But it really taught me how to connect everything together, you know. From it taught me how to connect, how risk and design were integrated, you know, why risk management needs to be that first thing done. You know, but yeah, I had a very privileged job when I was working at Thermo. You know, it was very chilled relative to kind of being that startup.
So Adam is the first speaker in the new Friday in Focus series. We're rebranding the thing and gonna make an announcement shortly. And about MedTech Leading Voice Exchange, which is a new platform. But not going to do that yet. What I want to talk about for a second is, first of all, the topic for today is tackling the biggest challenges in medtech regulatory. So what I would like all of you to do is to put in your number one challenge into the chat and to say what you think the biggest regulatory challenge is. And then part of the new format is to use the chat more robustly than we've done in the past. And because I think that makes it more interactive. And yeah, that's part of the thing. And then we want to introduce some new features, TBD, like the idea of having a product demo for 5 minutes, or a fast round for 5 minutes, or a startup come on for 5 minutes during each one of the calls, so that it's not just all lecture. And we're trying to make these calls more interactive, but also to expand the audience from, 30 people to 130 people, so that we have a larger, more dynamic group. And I might, ask you guys to help promote that. Part and parcel to that, if you want to be a speaker, you should reach out to me and let me know that you would like to get on the calendar, because we plan on building out an editorial calendar and promoting these things more than a week in advance. The way that the calls are structured right now as webinars restricts that capability, but by switching over to meetings and having the same login and password every week, then you'll all be able to log in with the same user ID and password every single week to the call. And that will be a slight format change. So I don't know how many responses we've gotten so far. Uh, Trying to answer FDA AI response properly, one person says. Um, uh,
Sometimes
Keeping
they
up
just
with all
ask
the
like weird questions and like that's not what our device does. What are you doing?
understanding the local regulation and dynamics when entering a new market, not assuming that you'll apply the same formula as your current market. Okay, that's good. Um,
I think that Natalie, sorry, Nelly and Michelle kind of on the kind of Michelle culture, and Nelly on kind of budget, senior management, you know, as kind of everything Nelly said there is pretty much culture you peel the
Well,
layers of
it
the
is
onion.
culture. It's culture, but I'm literally seeing it right now as we speak. At least half of my clients are like, I don't care how long it takes. Here's your budget, but your FDA inspector's telling you have to do it timely. And so they're just, it's like two worlds colliding. And so it's like, oh, we'll do these cuts and you can talk to it later. And I can tell you the FDA inspectors are not taking the talk about it later or memos approach acceptable. But yeah, the culture is just, it's quality on a shelf. I did my quality. I'm done. I don't have to do anything else.
Yep. Starts, stops. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got one client that has paused his QMS 3 times in 5 years, has had 4 483s. And we have 3 right now we're trying to close, and he tried to pause it again. And I'm like, you're going to get a warning letter if you do not close these CAPAs.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's pretty crazy. I think, Sean, if you like, while we're letting some people kind of finalize the answers, I can give. I thought everyone, because I knew predominantly everyone would be on the other side of the water, I could maybe give you a little update on what's going on in the UK, if you like, just while we're kind of spending a few minutes, kind of everyone's putting their answers in. You know, just a really, really quick update, if you like, just because I've kind of like, I've got some things that are coming up which I would probably like to tell you. So does that sound okay, Sean? Are you quite happy with that?
Hit it.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, so UK at the moment, really, really candidly, are still in the process of kind of copying and pasting the EU MDR and doing the find and replace with the UK MDR. So in the next month, in June, basically, we will see the draft UK MDR, which will be released for review. And I believe they'll probably, you know, as they usually do, they will run a consultation on it, I believe. From everything we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years from the MHRA on the kind of revision of the UK legislation, you know, I make the comments about the EU MDR kind of facetiously. However, there is a real element of it being serious, that, you know, the post-market surveillance regulations that the UK released in January, that entered into force on the 16th of June, so next month, basically are the provisions of post-market surveillance from the EU MDR, essentially. And then if we look at everything the EU or the UK are releasing, essentially, there's a lot of conversation from the UK right now around mutual recognition agreements, comparable regulator countries, reliance and recognition, essentially. So everything that we're seeing at the moment suggests that the UK are going to heavily align to the EU MDR. You know, and I think that's just for all of your clients or whoever you work for. That's, you know, if you've got new devices on the way, there will be some differences. You know, I think the main thing that the question mark around is, I'd love to hear some of your opinions on it, is, you know, personally, I'm not sure what the UK CA mark is doing at the moment. You know, well, a lot of people in the UK are struggling to see why we created a UK CA mark other than for a political reason to have our own mark, basically. You know, it looked bad after Brexit to leave and still have a CE mark, so the UK span up the UK CA mark. So at the moment, still not convinced on, you know, on its use at the moment, whether it's relevant. You know, I can see a lot, depending on how this consultation goes. You know, I think we may see the UK CA mark kind of used slightly differently or not used at all by a lot of manufacturers. But yeah, that's essentially, so the draft legislation is released next month, so definitely keep an eye out for that when it comes out. You know, I think it's something that would be really good to have some comments on it from, you know, from people who are in different kind of regulatory locations. I think it helps. Today as well, the UK are extending, they've kind of confirmed the extension of the application for of the EU assimilated law. I think you've probably seen that going around today, but that applies for tomorrow. So that means we are essentially keeping that EU law for the next like 5 years, basically. You know, so that's kind of where they are. And then post-market surveillance requirements will come in to force from June. So people will be assessed against that by the UK approved bodies when it comes along. So that's pretty much it from the UK and the really quick update. You know, without going into too much other things that I can see people are talking around here, which we can kind of cover. So I think, Sean, if you like, we can kind of get onto some of these other topics, if you like, unless anyone has some kind of questions on the UK that you would like me to answer while we're on this, or have a discussion on any parts. I'm happy to go like that if you like. And yes, Michelle, you're correct about the UKCA. Small paperwork, yes. That's why everyone is asking this question of why do we?
Can I have a question?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, can I have a question about UKCA?
Yeah, of course.
So I work for a contract manufacturer. They supply into UK. Before Brexit, everything was fine, and under MDG, everything was fine. And now with the same device, we have to do the MDR, and now we have to do the UKCA. So it's just like, even just the artwork on the label, the UDI and stuff, it took like 2-3 months for no, I don't know, no benefit to the patients, to the users, just work. And also, I also work with some EU authorized representatives.
Okay.
So they, you know, the idea right now out there with all those reps or US agents or whatever, everybody's feeling is that really we spend a lot of time doing busy paperwork. We are not spending enough time and energy to make the device better, to provide better quality. So what are your thoughts on that?
You're not alone. That is the norm at the moment. Is you know, I find myself at the moment recommending clients to not go through the process of trying to affix the UK CA mark to the UK MDR, because, you know, say we make a medical device today, we'll have to go through that UK approved body, you know, typical conformity assessment process. And, you know, as we see, the UK is just starting to release everything now, and it's just basically going to copy and paste what's going on in the EU. So my view on it is really, I have found myself very much recently, in the interest of managing my clients' budgets and keeping things simple, I've found myself, which I never thought I would, I've found myself kind of saying to clients, maybe go through the EU route first, and then just leverage the recognition, because the UK are just going to follow everything that, you know, the US are doing basically, or the UK kind of thing. That's the way or the EU, sorry, that's the way they're looking at moving at the moment, is really heavy on reliance. So personally, depending on what your regulatory strategy is, I at the moment, you know, but you said you're a contract manufacturer at the moment.
Well, because I know this is being recorded, so that's
Okay.
what I'm willing to talk about. But then
Okay.
my question is also, what's the idea behind MHRA and the UK governmental regulatory requirement? Like a lot of devices under CE mark are class 1 because the risk assessment. And then when they try to have a UK CA mark, they say, well, we're going to up class this to class 2A. So with class 2A, you know, your clinical evaluation reports, your PMCF and all kind of things, and even some of them, the usabilities and just a lot of paperwork. And then, so I don't know what's the benefit and what's the reason behind to upclass those devices.
So I will make available a webinar by the MHRA, which I think you may benefit from, Michelle. And on that webinar, they go through the rationale behind what they're doing. So the UK, I suppose, a real fundamental thing that should be said, I suppose, is the UK, you know, everything that happened with the FDA recently, with the resources being really restricted. The UK MHRA is a competent authority that is not that well resourced in the grand scheme of, you know, and compared to other competent authorities. So they're moving really quickly, actually. You know, like in just in a couple of years, there's new legislation out, etc. So they're moving really fast. But the problem that they have is that they need to leverage what everyone else is doing, because they cannot spin up a new regulation themselves, you know. So when the UK left the EU, there was this problem where they were leveraging MDD, and then, you know, still EU MDD, UK MDR. But what was happening was they were losing that position as the MHRA and the competent authority and the UK, because the UK, you know, absolutely, it loves itself as being a global leader, you know. So it's still, the UK always will have to be perceived as a global leader, and that it's very political. You know, we know where you are is also the same, you know, in that sense. But with that, I think that is a lot of the reason why they're doing it, because they cannot be seen to have a less stringent regulatory program than, say, competitor or comparative countries, basically. But yeah, a lot of it is bringing it up to speed. But what should be able to happen is you should be able to, you know, eventually, I think things will become easier, but you should be able to place your device on the EU, and that should also be copy and pasted essentially to the UK. That is what the UK is really driving towards, because Brexit has left a real kind of open wound after that plaster was ripped off, basically, you know. So the plan is to essentially try and harmonize to the EU. So it's painful, everything you're doing for the UK, but I don't think it's going to change in that sense, personally.
Okay, so then
somebody should make a cheat sheet around this.
Yeah. So how will we know when your webinar is available?
So the MHRA published a webinar last year, which I can send to Sean and he can make it available to this group. It's on YouTube. It's about an hour-ish, and they go through the main elements. So they go through technical documentation,
I
essential.
might have seen that. I don't know. But
Yeah, it's really worth a watch. And but you can watch that and then see everything that's happening now, and you'll be able to put them together and say, okay, yeah. But basically, that webinar they done basically says we are going to go, in line with the UNDR, potentially over and above.
Yeah, because the contract manufacturers supply into a few of your very large manufacturers or distributors in the UK.
Yeah.
So, I'm very familiar. Well, I work with them very closely, and then it was just a lot of paperwork, but
Yeah. And
So
then
we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's move on to the first topic. So while you're thinking of the first topic that you want to address, I'm just going to go ahead and put in the chat this launch website and just give you the 30-second overview. We've officially taken over the Friday calls. They're the Friday in Focus calls, which is part of a larger platform called MedTech Leading Voice Exchange. Exchange is a community. It's an online community, and it's built for and with product and service providers like yourselves, because there was no organization representing product and service providers. RAPS is for regulatory affairs professionals. AdvaMed is for manufacturers. LSI is for startups. There are no groups for you all. And so me as a marketer, have noticed over and over again that you all have one thing in common. Well, two things in common. That is expertise and a hatred of marketing. So the goal here is to bring you all together to provide an audience and a stage and a platform for you to share your expertise more broadly through publications, through channels, through interaction, and to develop personal connections with other members in the community, as well as with OEMs and startups. So we're going to be expanding the Friday calls to include more manufacturers, to include more startups, to include more investors, and try to cover, all the bases in the ecosystem on a more regular basis. Obviously, it's going to skew towards product and service providers to a certain extent, because you are the members. So what I'm trying to get people to do is to join this community, to make a commitment to it, and to step up. We need community leaders in clinical, in regulatory, in quality, in risk, safety, and the standards, etc. Engineering, cybersecurity, supply chain. All of those things, are going to require resources. Um, but every single one of them is speaking opportunities, publishing opportunities, exposure opportunities. And the last thing that I'll say before I turn it back over to Adam is support one another. Do so vigorously. What we saw at 10X, let's carry that energy forward and continue to support one another on LinkedIn, and to build an actual there. It's funny, people say community, and it's like this bogus marketing word, that really doesn't mean anything. We have an opportunity here to build a community of people that can help each other. And when you do that, when everybody is trying to do it alone, they're not likely to succeed. And that's been my experience. But when we come together, we stand a much better chance. So please take a look at the landing page. Don't judge the video too harshly. It was a first effort. We'll replace that with a better video moving forward. But I'm gonna be this. So this is the soft launch. You are the first to hear about this, and I hope that you will. Yeah, the link is there. It's Illumino courses, mykajabi.com/MLV exchange/register. We'll create a shorter version of that, but it is posted in there. So yeah, please Show your support, get involved. Okay, you're not seeing it in the chat. It's literally in the chat. I don't.
There's some people who posted after your chat, so
Okay, so I posted it again.
just a question. So on our old MDG, will that fee stop being charged, or how's that going to work?
Yes, Joe and I are talking about that right now. So that is you can just stop the payment or yes, that is no longer going to be actively supported.
I don't know. We can stop the payment. Like for me, I signed up just automatic pay in using my credit card, and then Joe just process it. I don't know how that works though.
Okay, well, I'll talk with him. I had a conversation with him about it yesterday, and we'll have another conversation about it and clarify that for everyone next week. Does that sound fair? So with that in mind, okay, hopefully you guys can see it. Do you have a coupon code for me on Dutch? Yes, I have a coupon code. I think the coupon code is MLV20. Try that.
No, that did not work.
No. Okay, well, I'll have to get that from Dylan later in the call. Nelly, just text Dylan.
That's what I'm doing right now.
Oh, it might be MLVX20. At any rate, next topic is, sorry, Adam, I apologize for hijacking your call.
It's okay, don't worry about it. Feel free, continue.
So I really liked Jose's question, which was tying it all together. But maybe we should go with one of the more individual ones before we get to all that. So let's do something like time and resources, taking time to work on procedures, handle CAPAs, etc. We're a manufacturer. What would you say to the manufacturer?
So the kind of word that I think is most relevant to it is risk. I see every single company that I audit, I think every manufacturer has the best will. Everyone has the will. I do not believe that people are kind of willingly non-compliant and purposefully putting dangerous product on the market. It's just not like that, right? But people have will. And I think from a quality system perspective, a lot of people have legacy systems with, say, a really good example is, say, your non-conformance procedure, where I see so many manufacturers that have like a non-conformance procedure which escalates everything to CAPAs, for example, and then they end up totally inundated. So they spend all of their time trying to close CAPAs for things that really don't matter, and then they don't get to the actual root cause because they have a million CAPAs open for low risk issues. And then I see that really, I think what Maya said, starts to eat into the quality and the regulatory teams day to day, which is to operate the system. But I think also it's hard to answer this question without mentioning what Michelle said about culture. The quality team should not just be the people that are kind of doing all of that in that sense. And I think that is kind of part of the problem. So there's the kind of the way the QMS is set up, that it's not risk-based enough. I do think the QMSs, certainly from when I started in the industry versus now, need to, be a bit like that, have more of an appetite for risk in that sense. You cannot deal with everything. So, I think they need to really focus on how to deal with, I think it's the phrase my old mentor said to me. I think my mentor Natalie McRoberts, everyone here will probably know Natalie is my mentor from back in the day. If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority, is what I was really taught. And I think that is the problem. I think it's really, I see it as a consultant. We can't do everything. CAPAs are to me anyway, are the biggest things the organization is facing. If it's not a big thing that the organization is facing, it should not be being called a CAPA in that sense. And I think, as an auditor, again, with my auditor hat on, there's two red flags when looking at kappas. If there's no kappas and if there's a lot of kappas, you know, they start to make the kind of alarm bells ring. You say, okay, is your system not detecting it? Or maybe you're detecting too much. You know, so I'd be saying, Maya, on that risk-based approach, you know, really go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And, you know, I think don't be afraid to be really bold, you know, and just say, we're not going to deal with that in the same way, because we have all of this other more important things to deal with.
So one of the things I've done at my QMS is when you've got a non-conformance, everybody wants to document it, which is reasonable because you want to show that. So what we've done in BQC land is in the NCR process, we have a manufacturing, we call it ops NCRs and QMS NCRs. You can document the entire non-conformance, close it out. If you do a small, it's almost like a small kappa, but it's quick and easy. You're supposed to document it, take the action, sign the record, and close it out. And so that way, that's super. So that's like where, okay, the medium to high risks go to the kappa, and then you're still documenting any corrections that you're making, but you're not escalating everything into kappa land.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
One of the things I had is I got the pleasure when I got MDSAP trained, God, 15 years ago, please don't date me, is the auditor was an ex-FDA or an ex-non-notified body auditor. And one of the things that he said to me, and it really sticks to me this day, he goes, if you have an employee force of 100 people, you should have no more than 2, maybe 10 kappas open. That's it. So think about it. If you have 5 people, think of that ratio. And so that's something I think about, and you know, when I'm taking the risks on kappa.
So that's exactly it. I give the same feedback, you know. But I think I don't know what everyone else's opinion is on why we've ended up in this situation with this. You know, I think again it's from that the most charitable interpretation is because everyone's trying to do the right thing. I suppose that's my belief, is the way I look at it. But I think a lot of it is being scarred from previous audits or inspections, and everyone thinks, oh, we need to manage absolutely everything. You know, I think that's where I see it a lot in just for yourself, Nelly, as well. I see it a lot in audit schedules, where people try and audit every year. Audit schedule looks the same. Try and audit everything every single year. You know, it's against what 13485 says. But you know, I work with clients and I say to them, create an audit schedule over 3 years. You know, justify why you're doing things a certain way. You know, don't be afraid to not audit something if your QMS signals are not flagging any concern. You know, if your post-market surveillance related to your device is showing that there's nothing going on, really high safety profile, then you know you can begin to prioritize what you're looking at a little bit more. You know, and I think the key to it is that fundamental risk-based system, from your non-conformance to kappa, internal audits, the way actions are allocated. You know, I think all across the QMS needs a real kind of revision of it. I think 13485 as well as a standard, I think could maybe, it obviously talks about risk, but it doesn't talk about risk maybe as much as some of the other standards within the ISO Annex SL framework. You know, so I think a revision to 13485 that emphasizes more of a risk-based approach for manufacturers may also help people just make it implicit, you know.
So let's,
Sorry, go ahead.
Can we shift gears a little bit and move to the topic of culture? Now, Michelle Lott had put in culture. I'm not exactly sure what she means by that, because, you know, every organization has a different culture, but, you know, what are the biggest challenges? Anybody have a comment on that? Michelle, maybe, or Nelly, or anyone?
I find the biggest challenge with the culture, and it connects with the kappa NCR's internal audits manager review, is that people don't know what to do, so then they go to kappa first. It's like it's like, I don't know how to do this. I want to do the right thing, to your point, Adam. So I'm going to go to kappa instead of having. And it also connects back is if you have somebody who's only been in a large company, all large companies do is issue kappas, right? Whereas if you've been in a startup, you've had to wear so many hats, you've seen more, and you have more of a sense of where you can take risk. Whereas when you're in a large company, you don't have that sense because you're in a very siloed, you have a very structured role.
Yeah. Can I just add on to that as well? I think with that, Nelly, I think and on Michelle's point about culture, that I was doing an audit recently on a very, very high risk device, and the and it was a really large manufacturer. And the front room had like 15 people in the front room, and it was just me doing the audit, right? And that was really like it's quite a lot to manage, because I know they had the front room, they had the back room, and it's a lot to, as one auditor, that's like a lot to manage. And the culture of this organization, my thing is, I always say I audit for conformance, not non-conformance, and I say that in opening meetings. So I always make them aware and say, if I see anything that's a potential non-conformance, I will tell you as I see it, and I'll let you know what I would like to see the conformance, for this process or this objective evidence. And the appetite of this organization towards receiving non-conformances, legitimate non-conformances, that they could raise within their QMS to stop FDA or notified body, etc., raising it, they were so against it, and they would, the 15 people would fight me tooth and nail, and all I had to do was say, there's a requirement, here's the lack of evidence, and here's my cited deficiency, because I don't raise findings for no reason. But that, I think, that's a really dangerous culture. When I don't know if you all see it, but I see very regularly as a quality objective, no non-conformances from audits, no non-conformances on technical file reviews, etc. I believe they are really dangerous cultural, they're really dangerous from a cultural perspective, because there's always going to be problems. Like the MDR is like, it's so huge. For example, QMSR is coming. It's all, you can't not have issues. And I really believe when you see these objectives, it's always a bit of a concern for me, because I know that they're not that interested in what is actually going to come out of this audit in that sense. Just on that, so I think what you're saying there, Nelly, in that sense, I totally relate to in that sense.
So
but
you
I think
mentioned,
sorry, Sean.
You mentioned QMSR is coming. Be afraid, be very afraid, be not afraid. What's your take on that?
I think people here probably have more of a take on that than me personally, because but my take on it is that I think it's a really challenging time for medical device manufacturers, because the UK is changing things, the EU, MDR and IVDR, we all kind of got used to that, and now it's officially under a targeted evaluation, and God knows what that's going to look like when it changes. For example, that is really to me a concern, because everyone is kind of starting to get used to it now. Switzerland now has its own Swiss ordinance, which is essentially the MDR. But yeah, my take on QMSR is essentially, from what I've seen in the field, a lot of people are quite happy about it. And in the UK and in the EU, lots of people are happy about it. My caveat that I need to give them is that, it will not, the FDA will not accept your ISO 13485 certificate as, they will not do that. They are not that competent authority. Like, I think unless you've dealt with the FDA, you don't know what they're like. The FDA were the first competent authority I ever dealt with. I really, so before I dealt with anyone else, it was FDA. And I learned so much from them as a regulatory agency. I have a lot of respect for them. But yeah, my take on it is that I think we will see a lot of issues as a result of it, not from manufacturer, not from the FDA per se, but I believe a lot of people will use it inadvertently as a way of thinking, oh, well, it's reliance or it's recognition, but I don't think people understand that it's not quite going to be like that, that the FDA will still want to conduct verification with their own eyes, essentially, So that's my main view on it. That's my main caution to manufacturers. I believe any sort of harmonization is good. But yeah, I think there is risks with it. And I think the FDA will have a lot of hard work in repeating that message to everyone.
Okay, so moving on to Jose's question, since it was a big, hairy, naughty question. Jose, why don't you come off mute for a moment? And first of all, glad you're here, because along with QMSR is the FDA's new approach to cybersecurity. And is the EU taking cybersecurity as seriously as the United States is at this point? What's the story over there?
Yes, they are. Yeah, so the EU, because of the AI Act, the kind of and MDCG have released a lot of documentation on cybersecurity. With that comes into the issue of kind of artificial intelligence as a medical device, as well as software as a medical device. We have some very novel devices on the market in the EU at the moment that are one device I worked on, which is a really, really cool device. It integrates a piece of software that integrates into an endoscope that essentially uses artificial intelligence to scan tissue samples and define benign or cancerous. That's cleared and on the market now. It's done, you know. So cybersecurity in the UK is taken, and in the EU, taken really seriously. The UK is trying to become, along with Korea, I suppose, a bit of a leader with AI as a medical device. They're releasing a lot of guidance documents on it. So is Korea. Really definitely worth checking out. But I'd say cybersecurity, I noticed that there is a lack of competence for it. You know, I think it's still perceived as maybe a bit boring by a lot of people, you know, by a lot of regulatory people as well. A lot of my good friends think it's super boring and they're just like, oh, not interested, you know. So, but it is taken very seriously by the authorities.
So Jose, what do you have to say to all that?
Yeah, I mean, the gist of my comment was that I know in particular, a lot of our clients who are startups, part of what they struggle with, even beyond cybersecurity, is just how to tie everything together. You know, everything's interrelated. There's so many guidance documents. There's so many standards. You know, there's the regulations, of course. There's the different geographies. And so I think the question that you had originally asked is like, what's the biggest challenge? And I think the biggest challenge for startups in particular is understanding how it all comes together. So, you know, we specialize in cybersecurity and software. And even there, which is just a subset of most systems, unless they're pure software as medical devices. You know, even just in kind of that subset, there's tons of things to be familiar with, you know, from 62304 to SW96 and then all the guidance documents and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges that companies have. And it's interesting, you know, you mentioned earlier that contrast between large companies and startups, where at a large company, you might have a team of dedicated people whose specialty is whatever, cybersecurity or software, or, you know, compatibility or whatever. Whereas at a startup, you're kind of leaning on a single or a few consultants or employees to have to be able to manage it all. But I have to imagine that even at the larger companies, you need somebody who does understand it all, even if maybe not at the same level of depth, but who can go, wait a minute, that thing you're doing in cybersecurity is impacting usability, you know, and so, or, you know, like we need to get the input from the clinical team, or we need to, you know, see how it aligns with this new regulation, this different geography. So I think that's just the challenge, that there's at least one or two players in any team that has to have a very holistic view of how it all comes together.
Yeah, I really see that for I think just on your point there, Jose, just to go through it all, I think the word kind of risk, usability, design control, everything, I think I was working with a manufacturer yesterday, and it all goes back to that kind of thing of intended use and user needs for me. You know, no user needs, no medical device, in my opinion. You know, no user needs, no medical device. That's how I look at things. You know, and in that case, everything, you know, needs to come out from there, essentially, you know. So your risk management plan and design, that design development plan are those first parts for me. In terms of that's how I piece it all together. For manufacturers that I say startups, you know, I do not know how they piece it all together in that sense, you know, without getting a consultant in. I don't believe there is an answer for them, unfortunately, because it's a minefield, you know.
The problem is they think there is an answer. And then they get to a month before 510K submission, and then they have to hire somebody like Jose, or, you know, to come in and fix everything.
Yeah.
Arlen, you had a comment, question? Maybe?
Yeah. My question is, I ran into a fellow last night, actually, who is a former CIO and a CISO, and he does cybersecurity audits for potential acquisitions for a client company. And this gets back to the point that was just made by Adam. So if you are a relatively unknowledgeable, for example, physician med tech startup entrepreneur who really doesn't understand this conversation, if you hire a person on this call, a RA, a regulatory affairs person, is that person the appropriately qualified person to do the cyber risk assessment? Or do you have to hire somebody else to do it?
Good question. So to me, risk management is a team activity. So it should not be, you know, I would be really concerned if I seen one person doing the full thing. You know, I think the key would be if you have a person who understands, say, that regulatory risk management framework, 14971, and being able to facilitate and ensure that that process drives the correct inputs to that, as well as the right outputs, you know, because I think recently I've seen a manufacturer that they had a software as a medical device. There was lots of software of unknown provenance being used within it. And none of that or the interoperability of the device with the hardware that it was associated with was on the risk management system. Nowhere. It was nowhere. You know, and that was, but they had a risk management plan, they had a hazard analysis, they had a risk management report, you know, but it was really lacking in the input of it. So they were subject matter experts. They were experts on the software and what the software was doing. But then I looked at it from that risk management perspective and that holistic view and said, you're missing lots of stuff here, you know? So I think the key to that would be having that blend approach, Arlen, probably on having a good team there that can speak freely, someone who knows the harmonized standard or the standard you're applying to be able to ensure correct facilitation, and then having the people in the room that are doing the work, you know, like Gemba, essentially, because they know the risks, but you need someone good to kind of pull the risks out of them. And put it through the process, basically. So yeah, I'd say it's a participative, you know, kind of team-based approach for that, especially in a startup, having the right people.
So Jose has talked to me about this before. You know, you might have a really talented engineering team working in your company, and it's still not necessarily appropriate for them to be doing the testing. Like the fuzz testing is like not a good use of their time. You know, you're paying them way too much money to be doing that, or and there are many components to what is now required by the FDA, and I guess similarly by the EU and the UK, for testing that. I assume that the same is true with biocompatibility. The same is true with, you know, any area where it's like, yeah, but do you really want, you know, your highest paid employee spending their time doing that work, or trying to get somebody who is not necessarily skilled in that area, is a smart, capable person, is certainly capable of figuring it out, to figure something out that one of you on this call has already figured out, you know? And so that becomes a question, you know, for me, like, when does it make more sense to outsource, um, you know, certain tasks, and to expand the capabilities of the team, as you said, that, you know, risk is best done as a team sport.
If I could like just take a crack at Arlen's original question, I don't think there's anybody on this call that would be willing to say that they are experts at everything that's required. It's impossible for a single person to be like an expert on sterilization and cybersecurity and biocompatibility and packaging and like everything else. No. So you need kind of a quarterback, like somebody who knows we're going to need to find the right person for 6601, and we know Leo. We're going to need to find the right person for cybersecurity, and I know Jose. We're going to need to find the right person for biocomp, and I've got somebody for that. So there's kind of like it's important to have a good quarterback kind of person, but for the individual pieces, just it requires so much expertise that you really have to bring a team of experts. And, you know, to Sean's earlier point, it's the climbing the learning curve that's going to be expensive. So for a company, for example, if they're looking at, okay, I can have my really smart chemical engineer or something figure out biocompatibility, and they're doing it for the first time, it's going to be more expensive for you and higher risk than if you find somebody who does this all day long, you know? So I think that's the kind of the challenge that I think particularly with startups have to come to grips with early. It's like, we're going to need a team of people who are experts in these various areas because it's all complicated.
Sounds like it sounds like a general contractor with subs.
Mm.
And I guess the barrier is money. I mean, you have a startup and you're pitching this, makes total sense. But what's this going to cost?
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of equate that to, you know, somebody hires a quality engineer to run the entire quality organization. And in my opinion, most quality engineers know the QMS, but they don't live and breathe it. And so they build it from an engineering perspective. Well, the average person is not an engineer. And so I write the procedure from a human perspective of a 7th grader that anybody can use it, whereas a QA engineer will look at it and write it for, hey, I'm an engineer, it needs to work in my brain so I understand it and speak to it. And so that's the same thing across all the disciplines. It's like I can do risk, but you know what? The first thing I tell people is I'm not a risk expert. I can get you started, but you really need to get a risk expert. I'm not your cybersecurity expert. I've got a template. But you know, you need to get this person started. So you need to find people who are willing to admit what they're good at as well, because a lot of people as consultants are like, I can do everything and I can provide everything. And that's dangerous because then, you know, you're not,
You're gonna get junk out of it.
yes,
And I've seen it several times over where clients have come back to me after they've been shafted, to be blunt, and that's a nice word. And they've ended up going to ground, ending up dying because even though they've come to me and gotten what they need and gotten approved, it's too late. They've lost their funding by then. And that's really sad. That bugs the crap out of me. I'd rather them come to me even a little late and get approved and get to market and be successful than going through that hell that they went through the first time.
yep.
There you go, Sean.
So as we go into the last 3 minutes of the call, I wanted to give anybody that's new the opportunity to say hello and say where they're from. I think there are a few people on this call that I haven't really met before.
Before you do, Sean, I do want to broadcast out that the coupon code is Sean20. It is Sean20.
In all caps.
I think it works. I just tried it. It went through and says process my payment. It worked.
Well, thank you for everyone that's registered. I think this is going to be a really dynamic community. To Jose's point about the quarterback, I think MLV Exchange could be that quarterback in a certain extent, that you're giving startups access to a mastermind group of experts where they can really come and get the advice that they want. I think the challenge, as we saw at 10X, is getting them to actually avail themselves of the resources available to them. And I think you all are familiar with that as providers and consultants is, so I think figuring out ways over the next year to expand the reach and the audience, it will be really exciting. Yes, there will be a member section where you can communicate amongst yourselves directly. This is private, the members only section. The other people, there'll be public facing resources and inwardly facing resources. Some resources that get shared on LinkedIn, some resources that don't. And all sort of a work in progress, but bear with me, there's no model for this. No, I should say no highly functioning model for this. So there was someone.
There was quite a few questions as well from me, Sean, I think, that were in here from earlier. So what I'm gonna do is I can put my LinkedIn in the chat if you want, and anyone, if there's anything that you didn't feel like I answered as well, because we're kind of a wee bit short on time, then feel free just to ask me, and I'd love this kind of stuff. So is that all right, Sean?
That is all right. Yes, please do. I apologize to anybody that's having trouble with their camera. Let me see. More promote panelist. More promote panelist. Yes.
I've been here. Sorry, I've been listening. Me too.
Well, it's nice to have you all here. And I look forward to your feedback. Julia, did you want to say hello to everyone?
I got
thank
a call. Bye. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye. Yeah, now my camera is working. I think I was like in another mode before. Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Julia. I'm currently located in Switzerland actually, but I will be moving to the US in a few months. So that's why I'm reaching out to this network, and I find it a really cool platform, and I will sure be back here in this discussion round. Yeah. Thank you.
And what do you do?
Oh yeah, so I work in medtech since a few years. My background is biochemistry, and I have experience in sterilization and also in MDR transition. I was part of now here in the company I work for. And I'm in quality management since more than 4 years, also doing a lot of auditing, internal and supplier quality management. So that's like my main topics I'm working in. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Welcome to the group.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to say anything before we drop off this week?
Not for me, no. Just thank you to everyone for kind of listening to me and taking part. So nice to meet you all.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
for being
Thank you,
here.
guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Ciao. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.